The first button on most mixers is called the gain. This is the button that controls the preamp level. Many of you may have already heard of the term unity gain. Many may not have, but on most professional mixers you will find that the scale of the fader is never 0 to 10. It is always minus infinity to 0 to plus whatever. And 0 is the level where we achieve unity gain. That means that we are doing nothing to the signal. We are not strengthening it or weakening it. It is at unity gain. It is a 0 decibel signal strength. Now what the gain does is it brings the input device to a usable level. I'm not getting too deeply into exactly how preamps work and exactly what they do, as this course is more for application purposes, so I will be explaining how you use it much more. But typically, the gain is used to get an initial level. Let me give you an example. If you want to set up the singer, you will bring your fader up to 0, so that you have unity gain on the fader. You're not doing anything to the sound. Then you will have the singer sing into their microphone, and you will lift the gain until you feel you have a decent signal strength to work with. Again, this is something that relates a lot to judgment call and experience as you work with the tools. So I'm not going to give you exact decibel levels and exact peak meter readings. This is something that you learn as you develop, and later in the course we will focus again more on that. For now, be aware. You bring your fader up to 0, so that you have unity gain. Your master fader out is also at 0. And then you lift the gain of the instrument or voice or source, whichever source it may be, that is passing through. You lift that to a level where you feel it is comfortable. Obviously, you do use level indicators if your mixer desk does have any, because that gives you an indication of where the signal is at, and that's always a very good guide. But that is essentially what gain does. Next, you will find the inserts. The insert is typically after gain. Insert is used literally to insert an effect into the chain. We will look at a graphical representation shortly, but for now, if you have your gain, let's say you have your input is there, gain is here. The very next thing will be the insert. So you could send the signal out to something, some device. I'm going to use as an example a compressor, and from there back into here. I have here an example of a cable that would be used typically with an insert. You would use the stereo jack. Stereo in inverted commas here, because it won't be stereo. One of the rings carries the signal out to one of these, let's say to that one. This one brings the signal back to that one, or to that one, tip, ring, sleeve, depending how it's connected. Typically, the sleeve is the earth. So this is what a cable looks like that would be used as an insert. I do not have a loose compressor unit available to show you, but this would typically go into the mixer. The signal would then flow through to this jack, which is plugged in to the compressor right over there. The compressor does what it needs to do, and the compressed sound comes out flowing back and connects to there, and it runs through the rest of the desk. Now if you were to disconnect this, the connector inside there is set up in such a way that if you take out the plug, it closes up the circuit and the signal flows. When you plug in, it opens up and the signal flows out and back in again. That is what the insert does. How, why, we'll talk about that more in detail. But this is essentially to use an inline effect. Something that does not have a wet versus dry component. Something that is a totally processed effect. Typically, something like compression works like that. You do not have some uncompressed sound and some compressed sound. You have one signal that is compressed. When we talk about compression at a later stage, it will become more clear. Of course, you do get parallel compression. They typically refer to it as New York compression, which is something totally different. We will discuss that again at a later stage. For now, be aware that something like a compressor is an inline effect. The signal comes, it is changed, and it goes out. A parallel effect typically has the signal coming in, it is changed, and goes out, but there's a partial signal that also goes out that is same as the original. Again, we'll talk about that in more detail. Delay, reverb, similar effects are parallel. Compressor, something like an outboard EQ, would also be an inline effect. Enough about that. For now, to continue, after the insert, your signal typically goes to a pad or a line mic button. Some mixers have them, some don't. Some just call them pad 20 dBs. That is typically if you have a line input, a stronger input, like from an instrument. You would pad it 20 dBs to have a bit more of a buffer, a bit more headroom. If you're plugging in a mic, you would release the pad so that it comes out at full strength. As I say, some would call them line mic. You press the button between line or mic. Some just call them pad 20 decibels. What essentially happens is a microphone signal is weaker than an instrument signal. Something like a keyboard, a guitar amp, any of your instruments, a CD player, DVD player, PC, all your line level signals are quite a bit stronger than a microphone level signal. And when you release the 20 dB pad, you're allowing a stronger signal from the mic to come into your system. Typically, you can control this with gain on most desks in any case. It is just a very quick and handy way to get between mic and line level on a desk. So if your desk has it, it's quite handy to use. When you plug in a piano, like an electronic piano, let's say, or a keyboard or a bass guitar line, you would typically press down on the pad button or the line mic button to create line level, and you will essentially have padded extra 20 decibels of, for lack of a better word, softness into your signal. You will literally have padded it so that there is more headroom to move with your gain and your volume. When you input a microphone, you want to release that so that you have more level, because the microphone is already quite soft in terms of its signal strength. Many desks then have a low cut. Again, this relates to EQ, which we will be discussing in more detail later as well, equalization. But for now, just be aware that this low cut is typically around 80 to 120. That is the frequency. If you recall from our discussion on frequencies, where the frequencies lie on the spectrum, around about 80 to 120 hertz is where the low cut is focused at, and it cuts everything below that. You may recall from our discussion, we had the frequency spectrum 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Round about here, let's say 80 or 120 or 100, it essentially drops the volume of all of that, so that you have what they call a low cut. You're cutting out the low frequencies. Typically this is used for microphones, specifically on stage especially. You can use it for many other applications, but one of the main reasons you have this is for microphones, open microphones, microphones being used by hand. Typically below 80, well, even from 100 and lower, most of the signal that you want from a human voice when they're singing across a microphone, there is none, or there is almost none. But on the other hand, the p, b, d, those sounds are in that range. Typically when someone is walking across a stage and goes doof, 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 that is in that range. Typically when someone handles a microphone and it goes doof, 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 that is in that range. So for this reason we often cut the lows on microphones for vocals and microphones that are used in handheld situations to avoid all that bottom end rumbling. That is one of the applications that that button is for. Next we get to the EQ, which will be handled separately as a discussion point on its own, as it is a little bit more intricate and involved than some of the other aspects that we have treated so far. So look out for the class on equalization coming shortly. Next on the desk are your auxiliaries and or monitor FX sends. I'm just showing them to you. For now, when we look at the signal flow, you will understand them in more detail. On most desks, the next button would be something like a pan and or routing. Now you will recall earlier I referred to subgroups or submixes, where you are routing a certain channel to a subgroup so that you can control 4 or 5 channels together via one subgroup fader. And this is where the pan and or the routing come in. You're routing to the submix buses, and you can control them, and then that goes out to the master or to wherever you're sending it. And you can pan between left and right or between the different buses. To take an example, let's say you have 4 submix buses. You would typically send this channel to subgroup 1 and 2. Now, with your pan, you would be able to move between either subgroup 1 or subgroup 2. Subgroup 1 and 2 would be sent out to the master. If you select 3 and 4, your signal will be sent to subgroup 3 and 4, not 1 and 2, and you will pan between 3 and 4. If you select to send to the master, the pan works on the left and right of the master. That's essentially what happens there. More detail about that shortly. Lastly, you have the fader, the long throw fader, and this is what it should be used for. Folks often are messing around with faders all the time, riding them the whole time. And yes, there may be applications where you need to be hands-on in a certain song or a certain narration or a drama that is being enacted. But be careful not to be riding these faders as if you're a jet pilot and controlling the whole time and jumping around and doing things. The faders are exactly what they say. They're faders. The thought behind them originally is to fade out the sound smoothly and fade in a sound smoothly. They are normally set roughly around 0. They will differ. Sometimes you need just a little bit more volume, a little bit less volume, and you'll set them up louder or softer. But typically their target is to be in the area of 0 as far as is possible. If you have to have a fader down at -30, chances are your gain is too high. You should drop your gain. If you have your fader riding at +6 or +12 the whole time, chances are your gain is too low. So always consider this when we work with the faders. But the faders are the last point of control before the signal goes out to either the subgroups or to the master. Then there's one button that many desks have and others don't, and it's called a PFL. Some call it a solo button, some have a mute button, all of these different aspects. Mute doing exactly what it says, it mutes that channel, makes it quiet. Solo again doing exactly what it says, it solos that channel. PFL standing for pre-fade listen. Sometimes you may have a track on a CD that needs to start playing, and you want to cue it up to be ready to play at a certain point in the concert. So you'll fade out that channel, click on the PFL, because now you're listening pre-fader, before the fader. The signal comes to the headphones that you may have on. You can hear the music from the CD player playing, and you can cue it up to the right spot, pause it and be ready, and now you have the fader back up, release the PFL, and the moment the CD needs to play, you press the button and it's right there. Oh, there are many other reasons. Sometimes you're mixing a group of singers and you just want to listen to one of them quickly to hear something, but it's maybe in or during a concert, so you can't solo them because then everything goes quiet. So you press PFL, put on the headphones and have a quick listen to that specific individual. You may want to tune a setting or two. Having said that, all live and studio engineers, be very careful, folks. Do not live with headphones on your head. You're not supposed to hear here and mix to this. You're supposed to hear here and mix to that. So you need to hear the house sound when you're mixing, not the headphone sound. You're supposed to hear the control room sound in the studio, not the headphone sound, because that is what you're mixing to. Always bear this in mind. The headphones are to quickly listen to a PFL, maybe queuing something up or changing a small setting that you're just not sure of and you just want to confirm on that one channel. But it should not be something that you have on the whole time and are working with the whole time. You need to hear what it sounds like in the house, and that is to what you mix. Lastly, the signal goes through the subgroups and or the master out. Sometimes you have some EQ on your master outs, but most of your larger desks and larger venues will have a 33 band stereo EQ just before the amps, which again we'll chat about at a later stage. For now, let me cross out all this. Please bear in mind, this square was for something else. It was just for the EQ when we were discussing the low cut. I will continue on this image for the time being as we talk about signal flow. I will also from time to time bring an image up on screen to give you some indications of what I speak. So looking at the signal flow, we're going to look at where does the signal go in this mixer disc. Where does it start out? How does it flow through all the points? And where does it go and finally end up? And how do we influence those various routes and the way it sounds in that situation? I've touched on most of the buttons that you will see on most mixers, and I may have said already, but every channel has the exact same ones. It's the exact same things that you can do to that specific channel or instrument that is going through the desk.